So my name is Scott Brady, and I'm the owner of Progressive Property Management. And if you're on this site, this will take about a half hour to go over kind of the California renter state and how this impacts you as an investment property owner and what you can do to better prepare for sort of what I would say is inevitable. And so we're going to go through the slideshow together, and I'll speak to each slide as we do this. So here we go. Here's who I am. That's a photo from a few years ago. I probably should update that, but I've been in the property management business for over 10 years, association management business for about 3 years, been a broker and a realtor for over 20 years. So I've been doing this for a while, and I want to share what I've learned and what I see coming so you can prepare yourself as an investment property owner. As I speak to you today, it's February of 2022, kind of crawling out of the last COVID crisis here. We'll see if it happens again, but things are kind of getting back to normal. And so everything we're talking about here is really valid. So California could be the first renter state in the nation. And when we say renter state, that means that there are more renter households than owner households. And a lot of reasons are causing this. And of course, one of the biggest ones is that home prices are too expensive in California. I'm going to say the median price home in Orange County now is pushing $900,000. And people just have no option but to rent. So these are kind of the tipping points of what happens, the trends that create a renter state. Once 60% of the households are renters, and usually that means about 51% of the voters, then the elected officials, whether it's state, local, city, start pandering to the masses. Elected officials like to stay elected, so they will enact rent control and just cause eviction. Of course, already in the state of California, after AB 1482, which we'll talk about later, which became law in 2020, there already is statewide rent control when it comes to certain properties, not all properties, but it definitely seems to be a trend across the state. And, I don't know about you, if you drive around, you'll see these gigantic, we call them wraparound apartment structures, where they build 300 to 400 units and they wrap it around a parking structure. So the living quarters are made out of wood, which is less expensive, of course, than concrete. But of course, the parking structure is made out of concrete. And, there's a lot of money being pushed at developers to build these type of units. And of course, the pandemic really cemented this situation and of the renter state, particularly now that inflation's pushing 5, 6, 7%, and we can currently increase rents 5% over the inflation rate. So I think you could see even additional laws coming down because of that burden. Bottom line is, when it becomes more appealing to rent than it is to own, then people rent. As I said, prices are just too high. Home prices have gone up over 30% in 2 years. There's a lot less job security right now, particularly with COVID. Certain industries are fine, but a lot of industries have been hammered by the COVID crisis. There's really no social cost to be a renter now. I live in Huntington Beach, and they built something called Pacific City, and a 2-bedroom rents for $4,000. And rather than that being sort of like, wow, geez, aren't you kind of throwing your money away? People are like, wow, look at him or her. She's got a great lifestyle. And once again, if you can live in a property and the owner really can't raise rents, in certain cities, they only can raise rent by CPI or a percent of CPI, and you can't get rid of me, you can't terminate my lease, and you have to make all the repairs, why buy? It's better to rent. San Francisco, they have people in San Francisco who are wealthy who live in rent control units because they'd rather take their money and invest it rather than buying a $2 million 2-bedroom house. So that tipping point, I just show a few cities where there are more renters than owners. Recently, Santa Ana just implemented a number of more restrictive rent control issues, which, after 30 days, it triggers just cause eviction, not 1 year. And the rents can only be raised, say, 3% over CPI. So Anaheim could be next. Long Beach has tried it pretty much every year for the last few years. What's interesting is, of course, renters want rent control. That's 65%. But look at the homeowners. Republicans, 35% is the lowest one. But it's interesting that even owners of homes are okay with rent control because they're just, well, I'm not a renter. It doesn't bother me. Well, you could turn your property into a rental and it will impact you. And statewide, over 60% support rent control. So there's no pushback on politicians to implement rent control. So where'd all the homeowners go? This is an interesting graph. It shows when rates go up, home ownership goes down, but when rates go down, home ownership historically has gone up. Well, that changed this time around. Rates were sitting at 3% the last year or two, and home ownership did not go up. And now with rates going back up, they're currently at 4. I suspect they'll be at 5 or 6% here soon. You better believe home ownership rates going to continue to decline precipitously because they simply can't afford to buy homes at higher mortgage rates. You know, for every one owner occupied unit being built, 5 rentals are being built. So you just gotta, you know, the market does what, you know, it's demand, right? And the demand is right now for rental properties, even expensive ones. And so you're seeing that demand be filled by developers. And so even though the number of construction is way down since the 80s, it's been increasing, but not single families. Multifamilies have been going up. Both have been going up, but multifamilies in particular. You know, the only group sort of rejecting renting is 65 and older, but all the others, particularly under 35, just the percent of home ownership is going way down. I'm old. I'm 58. But when I got out of college, the goal was that you within 2 to 3 years of getting out of college to buy your first house. And it was attainable. My first house, I think, cost $120,000 in 1988 or 89. That same property now is $600,000. So it's just more and more since the Great Recession. Pretty much every age group are not buying, they're renting. And of course, it makes sense. West Virginia has the highest ownership rate because homes are cheap there. You know, there I know people who manage properties there, and if you're a renter, there's like something wrong with you, because if a home only costs $175,000, it actually, the mortgage is actually cheaper than what the rent would be. So it's people who have bad credit or no job stability. They're the renters, everybody else buys. But in California, that's certainly not true. We're down to 55%, heading toward 50% pretty quickly here. It's just a very expensive place to own real estate. So typically this kind of goes in with your local elected officials. They start with inspections. How harmful is that? We just want to look at the inside of your property. And then we don't want you to look at criminal history. And of course, a no retaliation clause. And it gets progressively more and more onerous to owners till you end up with just cause eviction and rent control. And I'll explain those two in particular. Well, let me go through a few. Housing authority is if that's the same group that administers Section 8. So the county has a housing authority, but the bigger cities such as Anaheim and Santa Ana, and of course Long Beach, they have housing authorities, and they are the ones that handle Section 8 and rent control issues. Jury trial is in Long Beach, so when you want to evict a tenant, you have to go kind of a jury, but there's really no jury. It's the judge, and you go back and forth. So just cause eviction says as long as somebody's paying as agreed and behaving as agreed, you cannot remove them from their property. The only 2 instances typically if you're going to reoccupy the property and live there again, or you're doing substantive remodel. And I say substantive, meaning you got to pull permits. It's got to be not just putting carpet and paint. That's got to be 30 days of work kind of renovations. And of course, rent control is the state and of course local authorities can put a cap on how much you can increase the rent annually. So right now it's statewide 5% for 2 units or more, but I think it's in Berkeley, you can only do 75% of CPI. So if inflation is 4%, you can only raise the rents 3%. So they can make it as onerous as they want to. So here is the Tenant Protection Act of 2019 that went into effect in January 1st of 2020. So the rent cap is 5% over the Consumer Price Index. That sounded good when they drew this law up and the inflation was sitting at 1 or 2%. Now inflation's at running at 7%. Let's say it stays at 7%. I mean, I could raise the rents 12%. I think you might see that tighten up a little bit. And you can increase it 2 times in a 12-month period. So you could increase it, the first time, if the max is 6%, you can increase it to 3%, and then again 3% in the next 6 months. All multi-unit buildings are included. And any property owned by a corporation, not an LLC, but a REIT, a real estate investment trust. So a really big organization. And of course, it has to be older than 15 years, which is pretty much most duplexes or more. But so if it's a new construction, they're exempt from rent control and just cause eviction. But if it's an older property, which is probably 95, 98% of all properties, they're included. The only thing excluded currently would be single family homes. And if you live in one unit of a duplex and you rent the other one out, and if you decide to get rid of that tenant because you want to move back in, or you're going to do improvements, you got to let them not pay the last month's rent, or you pay them out 1 month's rent. So your choice. The tenant doesn't have to pay last month's rent, or you cut them a check for the 1 month's rent, and then you take the property back. So when is the no cause relocation triggered? So I talked about renovation to reoccupy, and you better be able to prove that to a housing authority. And of course, just cause is if they don't pay, they do not pay then you can evict them. And once you evict them, you can take the rents to market rent. It's a quit or cure. So let's say it's supposed to be, there's no pets, but sure enough, they have they're raising iguanas there. Then that would be a reason that you could evict a tenant. And really, criminal activity. You have to be pretty substantive criminal activity. That's, again, a reason why you could evict them. Whether your property is covered by AB 1482, that is, it's included in the rent control, or it's not, you have to disclose to your tenant that, hey, my single family home's not included. You're not covered by AB 1482 with my property. And if they are included, you got to disclose that as well. So they have to know if they benefit from the law or not. Okay, that's what's key about this. And okay, so they just have to be noticed. And if you don't, then you might be subject to rent control, even though your property is exempt from rent control. So you must disclose. And there's a form. I'm not going to go a whole lot what happened during COVID. Obviously, a lot of our tenants stopped paying. And so the government jumped in, and if they hadn't, it would have been complete chaos. The government jumped in at the end of the COVID and said, hey, as long as the tenant cooperates, fills out this affidavit that they were impacted by COVID, then we're going to pick up 80% of the past due rent. And actually, they increased that to 100% of the past due rent under Newsom. Initially, it was 80, and that did increase to 100%. But that's over. That moratorium's over. And tenants are now starting to get evicted again, or moving out on their own volition. A couple things I want to talk about. This is another law that kind of passed you need to be aware of as an owner. It used to be you could say in your advertising, I'm not participating in Section 8. So if you don't know what Section 8 is, I'll do a quick primer on it. It's a very big federal program that's administered by the state or local agencies, by the local housing authorities. And the tenant has to prove to the government that they don't have enough income to pay rent. And the government will pay for, we'll say, okay, here's a voucher. And you can, we'll pay for an $1,800 2-bedroom apartment. We'll kick in, $1,600 and you pay $200. It's a formula they use to decide how much the tenant has to pay and how much the government's going to pay. It's typically, they'll pay 2/3 their income. But, and so in the past, you could say, well, I don't want to participate in that program because, of course, they could do annual inspections. You're limited on rent increases. It was more difficult to evict a Section 8 tenant. It would take, you had to give a 90-day notice of a change. So it's just a little more onerous, a lot more paperwork. You're dealing with a housing authority. You can't do that anymore. It's considered income discrimination. So now if, when you're advertising, somebody says, I have Section 8, you go, great. But if you're asking $2,500, you don't have to take $1,800. I will warn you, some Section 8 people say, hey, tell you what, I'll give you the voucher for $1,800 and then I'll give you cash for $700 to make the $2,500. That's illegal because they've already shown the government what their income is. And if they're making something on the side and they haven't disclosed it to the government, that's a federal crime. So, so you don't have to come down on your rent because they only have a voucher for $1,800. But let's say you're asking $1,800, they have a voucher for $1,800. You can't say no. They qualify because the government says they qualify. So the only way to deny them at that point was their credit's bad, or they have pets, you're not allowing pets, or they can't come up with the security deposit. Good reason why you should ask for at least 2 months security deposit. But you can only look at credit and payment history. And if you say no, we're not taking Section 8. No, sorry. Then that's a fair housing violation, and a first-time fine, no warning, is $21,039. So it's steep. You don't want to make that mistake. You're willing to look at any qualified tenant. And you can also have to pay an attorney, might have to have compensation to the victim that you denied. So just be really careful. Do never say we don't allow Section 8. Let me talk about some of these trends, the real estate recession of this year, next year. It's been a good roll. The last recession ended in 2010. So we've had a 12-year run of a really good economy. Now we had a temporary recession during COVID for a few months, obviously when the entire economy shut down for 3 months, but the government then shoveled a lot of money to restart the economy, and obviously it did too much, if you will, and overheated the economy right now. But let's talk about real estate recession really briefly. I mean, we're going to have them. That's part of being a capitalism. So currently inflation is running at 5 to 7%. That's not tolerable. The government's going to have to increase federal rates and tamper down. And when they do that, then mortgages, which are sitting at 4, that were at high 2s, could go to 5 or 6%. And then that will take the wind out of the housing market. And then of course, credit card rates go up and car rates go up, and that kind of calms down the economy and slows it down. Historically, the 30-year fix has been 2% over the 10-year treasury. For the last few months, it's been under the 2-year treasury. So now the treasury is sitting at 2%. We certainly expect rates to go to 4%. And if the 10-year treasury goes to 3%, then we expect it to go 5%. And 5% sounds really good for any of you who've been around for a while, but it doesn't sound that good when rates are sitting at 2 3/4%. So basically mortgages will go up substantially at 5%, and that should damper prices. We believe home sales, the number of homes that sell, will go down 15 to 25% from the peak in 2021. And the reason is, everybody refinanced. So if you had a house that was worth $600,000 and you refinanced your $400,000 mortgage at 2.5%, and now that house, which was worth $600,000, is now worth $900,000. That's great. You have $300,000 equity. But if you were to sell, unless you're moving out of state or moving out of completely out of the housing market, to get something substantially better than $900,000, you have to pay $1.2 million. Okay, that's fine. Maybe you can qualify for that. But now your tax base, which was sitting at $400,000 or $500,000, $500 a month, has to go to $1,200. People are just saying, forget it. I'll just stay here, keep my low tax base. So I think we're going to see fewer people selling, and you may see prices go down as well, depending how high rates go up. You could see that impact. Interesting graph I pulled from the federal government that, and I'll move me here, that something like 40% of all the money ever printed was printed in 1 year in 2020 to get us out of the COVID crisis. So that's scary. That's a lot of cash being thrown out there in the economy. And I just pulled this morning. Inflation, which has been sitting at between 0 and 2%, doing nothing for the last 8 years, 10 years. Look how it's ratcheted up just the last year. It's gone from 2 to now 7%. So that's not good. And that will have, and as they try to, it's always hard for the feds. How do you cool down the economy without creating a recession? How do you, it's hard to do, particularly when there's a lot of moving parts. And right now, and by the time some of you see this, it will be old news, but Russia's been threatening Ukraine. What happens if they decide to attack Ukraine? Well, it will have negative impacts on the world economy. But in recessions, it's kind of our time to shine as an industry, because tenants they stumble, they lose their job, their hours get cut, their pay gets cut, and they stop paying. It takes longer to find a suitable tenant. The only ones out there looking are ones that don't have a job and have issues. Rent prices typically soften in a recession. And then a lot of sellers, what happens if their home that was worth $900,000 goes down to $800,000, which is still great, by the way. They say, you know what, rather than selling, I'll just keep it as a rental and I'll wait till prices go back up, then I'll sell. Tenants also illegally will add roommates and additional people to make the rental nut. And then if prices go down enough, you see investors jump in and they buy homes at a discount, turn them as rentals, and wait till the market goes back up. So there's all these things out there, and every year the legislature seems to create more laws to make it more difficult to self-manage. I think you may see just cause eviction for all properties, including single-family homes. Why are they carved out? There's some big organizations buying lots of single-family homes and turning them into rentals, or even building single-family homes and turning them into rentals. And I think a lot of people say, what's the difference between that and a single apartment? You may see tighter rent caps, particularly with inflation and how high it is. I don't think when tenants start getting 10% increases or 9% increases, they're going to scream, and we may see the cap go from 5 over to 1 over, 2 over. You may see relocation assistance in LA, for example. Relocation assistance isn't 1 month's rent, it's $20,000 depending on their situation. Another one you see is legal assistance. So you go to evict a tenant and they are provided an attorney to help them stave off the eviction. So you actually, in a sense, your tax dollars go to pay for somebody to make your life miserable. Some cities require owner registration, where you have to register that you own a rental property in your community. And then some cities implement an annual inspection, kind of like Section 8, to make sure that there's health and safety is covered. So, and you pay for it. So there's all these things out there happening. I think the trend is by far that all California properties are subject to rent control and just cause eviction. There are no carve-outs. So will cities do it? I'm sure. I'm going to go over quickly. So you might be saying, why? What is rent control good? Well, I'll give you the positives. I'm going to tell you the positives that they tell us why it's such a good thing, and then we'll go through the negatives. So the positive is that the idea is that if you implement rent control, now you have more affordable housing because rents can't go up that much. So when new construction, like I said, that place in Pacific City, that 2 bedrooms, 4,000, if you implement rent control and freeze rents at say 2,000, well, next year they only can go to, depending on what the, what the margin is, you can put on the rent control, but maybe you can only go up to 2,100 and 2,200, 2,300. It would take a lot of years to get to 4,000. So the idea is that, like for Section 8, there's a 2-year waiting list for Section 8. There's a huge number of people who need affordable housing. You definitely stay longer. There are stories of people in San Francisco who have been in the same property and rent control for 30 years. Why move, right? So tenants definitely stay longer. And the argument is, the more a family moves to different communities and different rentals, the more instability that family has. And if a family can stay in one place and the kids go to one school, that it actually helps families. And then it also keeps that diversification. You've heard of gentrification, where a community gets hot and all the people move in and the original people move out because they can't afford anymore. Well, that's kind of stops that. The argument is that, you don't get as much turnover with Section 8. So you don't have to worry about every year the tenant gives you notice and you got to recarpet and repaint and spend money, that you're going to kind of get really stable income, almost like a Section 8 effect. You have the same benefits of a Section 8, where it's kind of, why would the tenant ever leave? And they don't want to lose this good thing and get evicted. And because the housing authority is involved, they say they have better properties and they get rid of slumlords, and the tenants are willing to call the housing authority without a fear of being evicted. But I'm sure there are a bunch of negatives. It's fundamentally, it's just a violation of private property rights. It's your property. You should be able to do it with it as you deem fit. There's something called vacancy decontrol. And it's kind of an interesting concept that let's say you have a tenant gives you notice, they've been on rent control for 10 years and they're only paying $2,000, market's $3,000. Well, vacancy decontrol, even if the tenant leaves, you can't increase the rent to $3,000. You can only increase it by what the maximum cap is in that area. Maybe it's 5%. So you only can take it to $2,100. So that's not right. And there was a measure that got beaten recently at the legislature that you'd have to wait 5 years to sell the property. That you can't just take it off the market, sell it. That if you want to remove a tenant, you have to wait 5 years, to discourage owners from doing that. There's definitely no incentive for you to upgrade or improve the property. You can't recoup it on the rent. You just can't get it. So why? Just might as well leave it the way it is. The fact is that over time, there's a shortage of affordable housing because it becomes less appealing to own rental properties because you limit what I can get in return. Fewer people buy properties for rentals. A lot of people sell their rentals and take their money and put it into places where it don't have rent control, or states that don't have rent control. So over time, you actually lose the stock of affordable housing. And the last thing personal story is that we had a client who bought a 10-unit building in LA, and he thought, he knew it was in rent control. He knew his rights. Matter of fact, he's an attorney. And the day after he closed escrow, the tenants reported to the housing authority and said, hey, the electrical here is kind of wonky. It's dangerous. Property was built like in the 30s or 40s. So Mr. Mitchell had to put in all new electrical, cost him like $70,000. The day after he got done with that, they called the housing authority, said, the plumbing is kind of wonky too. He had to replumb the whole property to cost of $40,000. So he's out like $100,000. He goes to the housing authority and said, hey, I made substantive improvements to the property. I want to get a return back. and they allowed him to raise rents like $5 per unit per month. And their attitude was, well, he'd recoup it over a 30-year period. So, you have to deal with a third wheel, and that third wheel is the housing authority. And they tell you what you can increase your rents, and they tell you, what it's just ridiculous. And in the end, you kind of have this class war going on. It's the rich versus the poor, the owners versus the renters, and the renters see the owners being rich, and let's limit how much we can increase our rent, or we will require them to make certain improvements because they've got money and we don't. I hate to say it, but there's kind of this trend going on in particularly California of the three basic rights, right? So you have a right to housing, a right to healthcare, and God forbid, a right to income, and that's called universal basic income, UBI. That and I'm not saying it's going to happen, but that seems to be the trend. Gavin Newsom wants universal healthcare, and even Elon Musk says one day when all the robots have the jobs, we got to give people money to survive. So there's change. I know a lot of my clients are incredibly happy they bought rental properties 3, 4, 10 years ago. That property has gone up substantially. Rents have moved up nicely. You get to depreciate your property. You get to, you can pull out, you can do a refinance, pull out cash, and not pay taxes. So, but there's change, but I wouldn't be afraid of it. What can you do? So here's 8 ways to get ready for the renter stay. One is bring your rents to market. We have a lot of, we got a call yesterday. We picked up a property where she's rented for 10 years to this couple, and she was friends with him, and they are currently paying $19.95. Well, not paying $19.95 because they got divorced and the wife couldn't make the rents, and market rent's $3,000. So luckily it's a single family home, but we're quickly going to get those rents to market because God forbid they do rent control for single family homes, and then she's locked in at $2,000. It'll take her 10 years to get the $3,000. So bring your rents to market. 2 is find the best tenants. Don't just settle on a tenant. We'll talk about what we look for, but particularly income, stable income, particularly if we're going into a recession. I don't know if a server at the restaurant's going to be the safest bet. Make your contracts airtight. We pick up a lot of properties and we'll ask for a lease. They don't have a lease. They don't even have anything in writing, or if they do, it was 10 years ago. So we would want you to have your lease agreements be airtight. With rent control, say, why, if you've got a duplex and you put a tenant in there, do the lease for 11 months. And at the end of 11 months, you don't like that tenant, you can get rid of them. You can give them a 60-day notice, but actually a 30-day notice, because not a year yet. But if you do a 1-year lease, then you're kind of stuck. You got just cause eviction in that case. Make sure your units to code. We always say we protect our owners. We enforce the contract. We also protect tenants. And we make sure they have health and safety and quiet enjoyment, and they get the rights. They get to treat the property as if it were their own, even though it's not. Security deposits, we'll talk about a little bit, but so many owners take 1 month's rent as security deposit. And I'm going to tell you that's not enough. If you can get 2 months rent as security deposit, just changing the flooring is going to be, if the rent's $3,000, all new flooring is more than $3,000. So, and if the tenant causes damage, you get to debit it out of their security deposit. A lot of our clients have been doing 1031 exchanges. They're just taking the money from here and they're putting it into Nevada or Texas or Tennessee. Some are just liquidating, just taking their chips off the table. If you don't have the stomach for this, you don't have the stomach for a renter state, then, maybe it's time to pivot. And we're going to recommend that you consider a professional property management company. It's just getting too difficult to self-manage. And it was one thing when your rent was only $2,000 and your mortgage and all your costs were $1,800, and you're going to pay us, in that case, $115 was your entire profit margin. But now your rents are $3,000. You refinance, your mortgage is even lower, and our cost hasn't gone up that much. On a $3,000 rental, we're $75 plus 2% of the rents. We're $135. So and you get to write us off. So it's really a net cost of $100. So I'd consider professional property management. I want to tell you a little bit about our company. So we have centralized operations in Anaheim, but we have about 30 local property managers throughout Southern California, from Victorville down to Murrieta, out to Corona, of course, all of Orange County, all of Los Angeles. So there are local boots on the ground, and these are licensed real estate agents who do both property management. Many of them do association management for us, and they may sell a home or two, but they are independent contractors, but they work for us, and they do the leasing, the inspections, they do the renewals, and they're the ones you're going to be talking to on a daily basis. So we have a couple owners where they've got properties in Riverside, San Bernardino, LA, and Orange, and they get one company, but maybe 2 or 3 different property managers. We have other services, leasing, of course, to help you with contracts. And my company is built on 4 pillars, and we'll talk about them briefly, but it's value propositions, transparency, stellar customer service, and I think fair pricing with some service options. So here's what we do. I believe we solve your pain points. So we offer eviction protection. So if a tenant we place in your property doesn't behave as agreed and we need to evict them, we pay for that. We believe in getting 2 months security deposit. So if a tenant is unable or unwilling to give the second month, then with our preferred tenant program, we charge them a monthly fee and we guarantee you the second month's rent if there's any damage beyond the first month's rent. We require all tenants to have liability insurance. If they don't prove to us they have it, then we force them to have it. And we charge them $12.50. And that's a policy, $100,000 policy with no deductible. And that's important because I understand you may have insurance. And if the tenant does damage to your property, let's say they have a grease fire in the kitchen that does $50,000 of damage, you can use your insurance, but you have a deductible, probably $5,000, $10,000. And if you have a claim, your property might become uninsurable. They have something called the Clue system now, and the Clue system reports any claims you've had. And if you have oftentimes two claims, you're uninsurable. Now you have to go pay twice as much for insurance. And of course, we offer a tenant guarantee. So any tenant we put in your property, if within the first year they don't behave, they leave, or we force them to leave, then we'll put the next tenant for free. I think you always say our job is, yes, we collect rents, and yes, we do disbursements to you, and we organize vendors, and we do all that stuff, maintain your property, keeping compliance law, but really we're the wall between you and your tenant. Because the more decisions you make, if you're self-managing, you're making decisions of which tenant to put in there, and which repairs to affect, and how much they got a security deposit, and what the market rent is. You're going to get sued by the tenant if they disagree with you. They're going to sue you because, they're going to take you to small claims because you took too much money as security deposit. They're going to take you to, they're going to blame you and sue you for what God do, things we get all the time. But we see our job to be that wall. So we pick the tenant, given our guidelines. We do the repairs that are health and safety. We deduct out a security deposit. And if they don't agree with it, then they can take us a small claim. So we're trying to make this a passive income stream for you and not a job. That's our job. Anybody can collect rents and make disbursements. I think we better protect your asset. These are 4 pillars I talked about. I'm going to touch upon them very briefly. We offer value propositions, so you can trust us. We're totally transparent. I'll give some examples so that you can really believe us. And I understand that customer service is paramount here. And the fact that our property managers manage fewer properties than the typical company. A property manager can manage 100 to 200 properties. Our local property managers manage no more than 50 for the most part. So we expect them to give you a higher level of service. And yeah, you should get a fair price. So we have 8 performance guarantees. So if we don't perform as promised, we pay a real financial price. That's a payment guarantee. We're only paid when the tenant pays. Service, fee, response, better tenant satisfaction, a happiness guarantee. So we waive our monthly management fee if in certain cases, if we don't perform. We're totally transparent. So this is a map of properties we manage. As I said, we manage properties from Victorville down to Murrieta, out to Norco, of course. On our website, we have a comparison chart. So compare us with other management companies in our area, what our fee is. You direct link to our reviews. Currently have on this one, we now have 120 plus Google reviews that are 5-star plus. Yelp's a little tougher because Yelpers are a little difficult, but I mean, our owners love us. Or some tenants upset that we deducted on a security deposit and they don't agree with it? Sure. Are some angry that we evicted them? Of course, but that's what we get paid to do. So in this industry, there's 3 ways to pay. There's fixed, so a flat fee, say $125. There's a percent, say 6% of the collected rents. We choose a hybrid model. And the reason why we do a hybrid model of $75 plus 2% is that some of our rents are as low as $1,000. Some are as high as 5,000. And if it was fixed fee, it would be too much on the low end, too high on the high end. If it was a percent, it'd be too high on the high end and too low on the low end. So by doing the 75% plus 2%, we believe like we strike a midpoint. And here's a example of comparing us to the typical way people charge. And so yeah, we feel it's fair for all. So no matter where your property is located, no matter how much the rent, that's our fee. And that you can find us on our website, our pricing plans. We do local landlord seminars, so we'll be doing one in April. If you go to locallandlordseminar.com, you can get information. We're going to be doing a Zoom meeting this time. So you're happy to participate, kind of go over the stuff we went over in here, but also take questions. So feel free to join us. Go to locallandlordseminar.com. It's going to be in the first week of April. Three themes of that seminar is that, if you're managing properties, you're in the property management business, you're subject to the same laws we are. So we go over legal, insurance, vendors, all the things we kind of talked about here. We kind of give some horror stories, mistakes people have made and how you can avoid them. And we talk a little bit about how you can get richer in real estate by, syndications, 1031s, or even cashing out. That's our slogan. We manage happiness at no additional fee. So if you want to contact me, that's my email. Those are our websites. For Progressive PM is residential, and Progressive-AM is association management. And again, locallandlordseminar.com. I hope this helped, and feel free to reach out to me. And I hope you'll learn a little about the California Renter State.